Welcome to Too Close to Home, the series in which we dig up creepy stories, haunted places and mysteries from our very own patrons' hometowns. This episode we're looking at Robin, Marg, Ignacio, Stewie, and Tassara, and do we have some good stories in store for you five? If you want us to dig up stories from your area, then head on over to Patreon and join our Too Close to Home tier. Thank you everyone for supporting. And now, let's get started. Robin, Marg, Ignacio, Stewie, and Tassara, you know what to do. Hit those lights, sit back, and enjoy. Phoenix, Arizona. Our first story is for Robin Miller from Phoenix, Arizona. We've already covered Phoenix in a previous video, but luckily there's a lot for us to choose from in that area, and this case is particularly fascinating. It's the Phoenix trunk murders. Winnie Ruth McKinnell was born in Indiana in 1905 and was the daughter of a Methodist minister. Her family life was a bit dysfunctional and the family moved around a lot. From an early age, Ruth displayed malicious and spiteful tendencies. At 16, Ruth staged her own abduction to get back at a boy who had dumped her and had him arrested. A year after the incident, 17-year-old Ruth took a job as a student nurse at a mental asylum, where she met and fell in love with Dr. William C. Judd. However, the marriage was not a happy one. Her husband was more than 20 years older than her and a morphine addict. And after it was realized Ruth couldn't bear children, the marriage was soon in trouble, and Ruth moved back to Phoenix, Arizona, where she worked as governess to a wealthy family. It wasn't long before Ruth started an adulterous affair with one of the city's wealthiest businessmen and married 44-year-old playboy known as Happy Jack Halloran. Ruth later took a job as a secretary for a private medical clinic. There she befriended Annie Leroy, a twice-divorced 32-year-old lady who lived with her lesbian lover, Hedvig Sammy Samuelson. Not long after Ruth moved into Annie and Samuel's small 3-bedroom bungalow. However, Jack Halloran, who was a frequent visitor to the bungalow and a friend of the two women, started inviting his friends around for nights out of hard drinking and philandering, and within months, Annie and Sammy had enough and asked Ruth to move out. Although she remained on good terms with the women and still visited them on a regular basis. On Friday the 16th of October 1931, Ruth turned up at the bungalow to spend the evening with her friends, but something went terribly wrong. No one really knows the circumstances of what happened that evening, but it seems the women got into a fight about Hallorian's affections, and Annie and Sammy ended up being shot dead with a .22 caliber handgun. 2 days after the murders, Ruth took a night train to Los Angeles to visit her estranged husband. She asked her landlord to help her with her luggage that consisted of 2 unusually heavy trunks, a battered suitcase, a hat box, and a small leather bag. By the time the train reached its destination early the following morning, the 2 trunks were oozing blood and emanating a powerfully repulsive smell. When Ruth went to collect her luggage, the baggage handler demanded that she open the 2 trunks for inspection, but Ruth refused, saying her husband had the keys. Ruth then left the baggage, promising to return and collect it the next morning, but when she failed to return, the handler summoned a policeman who broke open the trunks. To his horror, crammed inside the larger one was the decomposing body of Annie Leroy, and the smaller one contained the head, torso, and lower legs of Sammy Samuelson. The remainder of her body was found in Ruth's hat box and smaller bag. As the discovery was leaked to the public, the Los Angeles newspapers were all over it, with the headline, "2 women's bodies shipped here in trunks by fiendish killer." Back in Phoenix, the owner of the bungalow where the women were murdered started offering tours of the crime scene at 10 cents a head, and so many people responded he made an absolute fortune. 4 days later, Ruth gave herself up to the police after an emotional appeal for her estranged husband. Initially, Ruth tried to claim that after an argument, the 2 women attacked her and she shot them to defend herself. She also claims Jack had helped her pack the bodies into the trunks. Jack was eventually exonerated of any involvement in the murders, although suspicions hung over him for the rest of his life and ruined his reputation and business. Ruth's self-defense claim was disputed after it was determined that both victims had been shot in the head at close range, and following a 3-week trial, Ruth was convicted of first-degree murder and was sentenced to be hanged. However, after an outpouring of support, Ruth was not hanged. Instead, she agreed to a sanity hearing and was judged to be insane and committed to the Arizona State Mental Hospital. Ruth went on to escape 5 times, always being recaptured within a matter of days. However, on the 6th attempt, in October 1962, Ruth ended up in the San Francisco Bay Area, where she assumed a new identity using the name Marian Lane. She soon found employment as a live-in housekeeper in a mansion owned by an elderly woman, where she remained for almost 7 years before the law caught up with her. This time she was judged sane and consigned to the state penitentiary, where she remained until late 1971. After her release, she returned to California, where under her identity as Marian Lane, she lived until her death in October 1998 at the age of 93. But this was not the end of the infamous trunk murders saga. For decades, the events of what actually happened that fateful night remained a mystery, until in 2014 a letter emerged that had been handwritten by Ruth to her attorney in 1933. The letter, which Jude called her first and only confession, stated that she alone planned and carried out the murders of Anne in an argument over the affections of Jack. She also stated that she had not planned to kill Sammy, but after she discovered the murder scene and attacked her, Sammy ended up being shot. Ruth also wrote that she acted alone in handling and transporting the bodies. However, those who have studied the case dispute Ruth's confession, believing it was yet another of her many accounts of the murder. Anne was just another one of her attempts to avoid the gallows and bolster her insanity defense. Whatever the truth, the case remains one of the most infamous in Phoenix, Arizona history. Belton, Texas. Belton, Texas is the hometown of our much appreciated Patreon, Mark Trevino. It's located between Waco, Texas and Austin. But we didn't have to look that far afield, as it seems Belton is full of mystery and legends. So Mark, let's just take a look at a few. Yeti Polk Park. Yeti Polk lived in Belton with her husband and 5 children in the late 1800s. The house they lived in was built by her wealthy father, who was a merchant in the city. During the Great Floods of 1913, more than 3,000 square miles of central Texas was deluged with water after the Guadalupe and Trinity rivers burst their banks. Over 180 people drowned as a result, most of them from Belton, and on December 2nd, Yeti Polk became yet another victim. The creek near her home flooded so high that it was up to the front porch, and water started seeping in the house through the floorboards. Yeti's husband Charles and her eldest son William Henry went out to the barn, which was on higher ground, to get their horses to carry the family to safety. But while Charles and William Henry made their way to the barn, a 30-foot wall of water hit the neighbour's house, which then slammed into the Polk's house, completely destroying it. Charles and William Henry desperately tried to escape the swirling waters, as they could hear Yeti and the children scream as they plunged into the creek, along with the splintering house. A passerby plucked William Henry from the waters, and Charles managed to cling to tree branches until he was rescued. But sadly, Yeti and her 4 remaining children perished in the raging water. It took volunteers 3 days to locate Yeti's battered body. The Polk family were buried in the North Belton Cemetery, located on Main Street, and where their house used to stand is where the benches of Yeti Polk Park are now. However, it seems that Yeti is not resting peacefully after her traumatic death, and her 4 children's ghostly apparitions have been spotted playing in the park named after her. In addition, other victims of the floods make their presence felt, and the park is a magnet for paranormal experts and ghost tours. Another place that seems to have a lot of paranormal activity is Belton City Centre. It's no surprise really, as some of the buildings there date back to the early 1900s, and Belton Central Avenue is considered to be one of the most haunted blocks in the state of Texas. There are many legends, and we'll take a look at a few. What is now the First Christian Church on the corner of Main Street and Water Street was originally Belton's Grand Opera House. During the Second World War, the Opera House was used to host dances, and visiting soldiers would date the girls from the old Baylor Girls' College, now the University of Mary Hardin Baylor. Sadly for some, this would be the last place they visited before going to combat, and it's said the souls of those unfortunate soldiers still haunt the area, trying to recapture happier times. Another ghost said to haunt the area is Mary, a young girl who lived in the city and used to walk from the former merchant firm of Sam S. Walker to the Boltonian building. However, sadly, one day she was hit by a car and killed. It's claimed Mary haunts the passage between the buildings, and at night you can sometimes clearly hear her voice. Children can also be heard in the upstairs portion of the W.S. Horton Drugs building. It is said that in the 1940s, electroshock therapy was performed on very young children in this part of the building, and the terrified children's screams can still be heard. We'd love to know if you've ever had any paranormal experiences in Belton, Mark. Grimsby. Stewie Wilson lives in Grimsby, a port town located near the banks of the River Humber in northeast Lincolnshire in the UK. Stewie has asked us to look at the Black Lady of Bradley Woods, but before we look at that case, we're going to look at some of the many unidentified bodies that have been washed up from the Humber over the years. In May 1993, the decomposed body of a male washed up on the banks of the Humber. It's believed he was between the ages of 20 and 40 and had been in the water for up to a month. His clothes were hard to define, but it's believed he was wearing blue trousers and navy and white striped boxer shorts. The one thing that was identifiable was his size 9 moccasin shoes and white socks. Nearly 25 years have passed and he still hasn't been identified. On February 18, 1972, the body of a man was found on the North Bank. He was aged between 60 and 70. Was discovered near Keyingham, a few miles down the river from Grimsby. The man was of a large build and was believed to have been in the water for 6 to 8 weeks. His false teeth were still in place and he was wearing a woolly jumper, grey trousers and a single-breasted blue jacket. The man became known as the body in the blue jacket, but sadly to this day no one has missed him and he's still never been identified. The last one was a little further down the river in Hull. On February 5, 2004, 2 male bodies were discovered on a docked cargo ship. Both men were found in the hold of the Des Delta merchant vessel, which was carrying nuts from Ghana. Both had been there long enough to be badly decomposed. One of them had a librarian ID card bearing the name Aaron Davis, although investigators have been unable to confirm that this is the man's identity. All that is known is that they were from Afro-Caribbean descent and aged somewhere between 16 and 100. Not a lot to go on. It's likely they were stowaways and their identity will never be known. Now, let's look at Stewie's requested story, The Black Lady of Bradley Woods. Bradley Woods is one of northeast Lincolnshire's most famous sites for visitors and wildlife. The ancient oak woodland is over 1,000 years old and was even mentioned in the Domesday Book, and nowadays it's considered an invaluable nature reserve. However, Bradley Woods is also known to be haunted and is the subject of the long-standing legend of the Black Lady. The story dates back to the War of the Roses between 1455 and 1487. It is said that during this time, a young woodsman and his wife lived with their baby in a cottage in the woods. But when the woodsman had to leave his beloved family to fight in the war, his wife was distraught. Every day she would carry their baby in her arms and walk the edge of the woods, hoping to see her husband return home. But one day, as she walked through the woods, she encountered the enemy army as they crossed the Humber River and marched through Grimsby on their way to attack Lincoln. 3 of the soldiers attacked and raped her, snatching her baby boy and riding off laughing into the woods with him. The woman desperately searched the woods for her child and husband, but never found them. After her death, rumours started to surface about a woman in the woods carrying on her never-ending search. Those who have witnessed her describe her as a young, pretty woman who is around 5'6" tall, dressed in a flowing black cloak and black hood that hides her pale, tear-soaked face. She is not malicious in any way, but has proved an unnerving sight to anyone who has encountered her. Over the centuries, as you would expect, the story has been somewhat enhanced, and now it is said she only makes an appearance on Christmas Eve And if those who are brave enough to go into the woods that night and shout, Black lady, I've stolen your baby," 3 times, her apparition will appear in front of you, desperately looking for her family. Stewie, have you been in the woods? And if so, have you ever experienced anything? La Paz, Bolivia. Bolivia is quite a large country in central South America, with a varied landscape, including mountains, desert, and rainforest. And considering its size, the population is relatively small at just under 12 million. Our much appreciated Patreon, Ignacio Veraloza, asked us to look at his home city of La Paz, although he gave us some great ideas for Bolivia as a whole, which we may look at in another video. La Paz is the most densely populated urban area in Bolivia. It's surrounded by mountains and sits at a staggering 11,975 feet above sea level, making it the highest capital city in the world. Just a few miles outside of the city is the Valle de la Luna, or Valley of the Moon, although despite its name it isn't actually a valley, but rather a maze of otherworldly stone formations and canyons, which are the remains of a mountain that's been battered by the elements for centuries. The area is a complete contrast to the bustling city of La Paz, and feels like an escape to another world. Its unique, eerie vibe has attracted some of the world's greatest scientists, but despite extensive studies, the area still holds enormous intrigue and mystery that's full of secrets. Many of the unique rock formations look like carved statues, and have names like El Buen Abuelo, the Vichacha's jump, the turtle shell, and the Cholita's hat. And looking at them, it's easy to see where they get their names from. It's said that the area was renamed in 1969 to the Valley of the Moon after it was visited by astronaut and moonwalker Neil Armstrong, who said it reminded him of his trip to the moon. The rocks contain a rich variety of minerals, and their erosion has exposed multiple coloured serrations, and this colourful anomaly has made the area very popular with tourists. However, trekking through the myriad of crevices and canyons comes with a warning, as it's rumoured the area is riddled with evil spirits that entice unsuspecting visitors to jump to their deaths if they wander too far into the formation. Although part of this legend may be attributed to the choma, or San Pedro hallucinogenic cactus that grows in the valley. At night, people were coming in, tripping out on hallucinogenic cactus and falling into the crevasses. Others are convinced the area, that many thousands of years ago was under the sea, has the lost city of Atlantis buried beneath its dramatic ravines. And looking at the terrain, it's easy to imagine a landscape underwater, with fish swimming between the cracks in the rock. However, sadly, in years to come, this natural phenomena will disappear. The altitude means the valley is subject to very high winds and 22 inches of rainfall a year, meaning the same forces that helped to build it are now slowly destroying it. Ignacio would also like us to share a personal story from his father that was encountered along the dead road in Los Yungas. Now, we've covered this road before in a previous video, so we thought it would be great to share Ignacio's story. The road was cut into the side of the Cordillera Oriental mountain chain in Bolivia by Paraguayan prisoners during the Chaco War in the 1930s. Whether they deliberately created a death trap is unclear, but over the next 80 years, the notorious road claimed the lives of up to 300 travellers per year. If the roller coaster route isn't enough to scare even the most experienced driver, then the unsettling number of crosses and memorials marking the spots where people lost their lives is. It's a stark reminder of just how many victims it has claimed. In places, you are literally driving along a cliff edge, and one wrong turn or lapse of concentration can be fatal. For many years, the death road was the only link between La Paz and the Yungas region of Bolivia, and it was not unusual for unsuspecting drivers of buses and trucks, overloaded with people and supplies, to overtake on the 3-meter hairpin bends, even at night, often resulting in them crashing down the side of the cliffs, taking with them whoever was travelling on board. And one of Bolivia's worst road accidents happened on July 24, 1983, when an overcrowded bus veered off the side of the road and into a canyon, killing more than 100 passengers. Ignacio's father was around 19, and his family had a farming property not far from La Paz. In order to travel to the city, they needed to travel along the notorious dead road. One weekend, his father's parents invited him to join them on a trip, but he refused, and they went without him. But as they travelled back along the dead road, they encountered a large vehicle that pushed their car off the cliff. They were able to rescue his father, but didn't realise his wife was still missing. When Ignacio's dad visited his father in hospital, he told him to look for his mother in the river. After searching for some time, he sadly found the body of his mother, but when he went back to the hospital to tell his father, he found he had passed away. Ignacio's father grew up in a huge farmhouse alone, and when he married and had Ignacio, it was also his home for a while. He remembers a woman similar to Ignacio's grandmother visiting the house. His family always told him it could have been his auntie. However, recently, after having a daughter of his own, she named one of her dolls Amelia, his grandmother's name, despite having no knowledge of her. Valparaiso, Indiana. Tassara has asked us to look at Valparaiso, Indiana in the US, and we have to admit, we struggled to find much, so we had to go back a few years to one of Valparaiso's most curious unsolved murder cases, that of Wayne Hale in 1905. We hope you enjoyed Tassara. 35-year-old Wayne lived with his wife Jessie and their 4 children on Wagon Road. Shortly after midnight on August 29, 1905, there was a knock at the door of the Hales' house. Wayne opened the door and welcomed the visitor into his home. The 2 men talked, and the conversation was witnessed by Wayne's 12-year-old daughter. She later claimed that the stranger wanted her father to show him the way to the home of a Polish farmer who lived about 2 miles away. Wayne was reluctant to go out in the dark, but after being offered money he agreed. This was the last time Wayne was seen alive. The next morning, his remains were found by section men employed on the Nickel Plate Road. Wayne's body was found in a ditch near the Nickel Plate tracks where the Wheeler Road crosses the railway. His throat had been slashed from ear to ear and his arms were covered in deep wounds indicative of a struggle. The weapon used was a razor that was found near the body, together with a loaded revolver which was used to bludgeon him. The motive for the murder was unclear, as it certainly wasn't robbery, as nothing had been stolen. So police looked at the possibility it was a revenge attack, as the murderer had made a crude attempt to cut Wayne's head off. After questioning the family, it was established the man that came to the house did not speak good English. This revelation threw up a possible suspect, an Italian man named Paul Giovan, who lived at the Hale home for 2 years and who since the murder had disappeared. However, Mrs. Hale stated she heard the man's voice, and it was not Paul's. After the murder of her husband, Jessie Hales found herself destitute and moved into the sheriff home until she could find other accommodation. However, really, she was being kept under surveillance, although their prime suspect was still Paul, and a search was on to find him. But investigators were growing increasingly suspicious of the late-night visitor story, especially after they learned that Jessie Hale planned to leave her husband and elope with Paul. And on October 27, 1905, Jessie Hale was arrested and charged as an accessory to the murder of her husband. The basis for the charge was that she was aware of the attempt that was going to be made to kill her husband, and that she had planned the midnight visitation that would lure him out of their home. The motivation for the murder was to collect on Wayne's life insurance policy, after which Paul and Jessie would flee the country. However, there was a twist in the case when in November 1905, a suit of bloody clothing buried in a suit box was found under a grapevine. In the jacket pocket, a book was found in which was written the name of a Chicago man. The man was tracked down, but said he lost the book, but he knew who found it, and it was not Paul. He claimed 3 hitmen carried out the murder. However, this lead led to nothing. The charges against Jessie were dropped, and the police were never able to track down Paul. For Jessie, life was tragic. Not long after her husband was murdered, their son Manning died of typhoid fever. He is buried in Valparaiso's Maplewood Cemetery. It was also revealed that Jessie had given birth to a daughter also named Jessie about 1 or 2 months prior to Wayne's murder. This child also passed away just over a year later, although it's strange that there was no mention of this new baby at the time Wayne was murdered, leading to speculation the child wasn't his. Ultimately, the mystery was never solved, although it has always been speculated Jessie was involved. Jessie went on to marry William Golden, at Valparaiso and lived in Porter County's Washington Township in a home situated along Indiana State Road 2. Jessie died on August 30th, 1937, and is buried with her children in Maplewood Cemetery, taking whatever secrets she knew about her husband's murder to the grave with her. So that's it for this episode of Too Close to Home. A huge thank you to all the patrons who support the show. We would not be able to keep up the content we do if it were not for them. We hope you enjoyed Robin, Mark, Ignacio, Stewie, and Tassera. Thanks for watching, and if you'd like your hometown featured, then don't forget to check out the Patreon.